The following is a sponsored episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm so thrilled to be joined all the way from across the world by my friend Casey Lightbody, who is the founder of The Quiet Collective. And today's conversation is going to be centered on something that I feel like will feel like a relief to many of you who shoulder that burden or that obligation to show up in a specific way online for your business. And it just doesn't quite fit like you want it to. Maybe it's not your personality, maybe it's not your interest point. And Casey has done a really amazing job of being able to build a social media optional business that aligns with her inner personality, and she's going to show us how she's done that and how she's able to utilize this concept of borrowing audiences. So we'll get into that in just a moment, but first I just wanted to give you a chance to say hello, Casey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and share that there is options out there that you don't have to be on social media 24/7 to build your business, right? So I'm excited to dive into this conversation. Thank you.
Of course. No, we're so grateful to have you and so encouraged by that reality for you. Just a quick introduction to those of you who are new to Casey. Casey, like I mentioned, is the founder of The Quiet Collective, and she helps quietly powerful women coaches and consultants grow consistent, fully booked businesses through strategic partnerships and relationship led marketing without relying on social media to be seen or successful. And Casey, what I find really interesting is, well, two things. First, you actually, this business that you're currently building is actually you learning from, like, as they say, hindsight is 2020. You learning from the first time when you built a business and actually burned it all down. It was a successful six-figure business, but you realized that you are actually quite introverted. You're very sensitive, and the model that you had been building under didn't serve you. So I do want to quickly give people a little bit of that backstory, because I do find that that is something that I'm sure a lot of people can quietly relate to. But then juxtapositioning that, I think it's also interesting that as an introvert, you actually made the personal decision to move to Australia knowing nobody without any network or audience. So I mean, that is incredible as somebody who both simultaneously struggles with maybe being around lots of people, but then also moving to a place where you have to then go out on your own and rebuild your entire network. What was that like? And tell us about, what's carried over and what you've left behind from that first business.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ellen. It has really been a journey. And like you said, hindsight is 2020. And as I reflect back, it was kind of 18 years ago when we immigrated, but we decided to immigrate completely blind, never having set foot in the country before.
Wow.
And, once we had the family settled, I'd always had this dream of starting my own business. And I said to my husband, okay, it's now or never. I'm going to start my first business because the kids are settled and I see this for myself, And so literally with no website, no social media presence, nothing, I landed my first customer, and it was a school mom in the car park. We got chatting one day, and she said, Casey, what do you do? And I said, oh, I do marketing. And she said, oh, I'm looking for some support with marketing. And so I said, okay, great, I'll help you. And so that was the start of the seed. But of course, I didn't know what I know now. And so I really was building my business in a way that I thought that I should be doing. So I was all over social media. I was doing the networking events. I remember one time going to the speed networking event and swapping big business cards, and the cacophony of noise, Ellen, in that room. I was like, oh my gosh, my poor little sensitive soul, this is not for me at all, And I was like, oh, I just can't do this. And when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm building this business in a way that's completely misaligned to who I was. And it was this moment where I was like, here I am 16 hours a day pouring my heart and soul into this. I went into business for the freedom and flexibility to be with my kids, and that's just not the reality. It's actually a nightmare. And so I did burn that business to the ground, and that's really the start of my personal development journey, where I realized, oh, I'm highly sensitive, I'm introverted. I don't have to pretend to be someone that I'm not. I don't have to wear an extroverted mask to build this business. And so that's kind of when I started the Quiet Collective and realized, okay, I want to help other sensitive women like me to build businesses that feel sustainable, that feel like they are aligned to who they want to be, or who they are rather. And so they can create sustainable success, and they don't have to kind of learn the lessons that I did. And so that's kind of what I've taken from that learning, is really tapping into the quiet. And so even the name, the Quiet Collective, there's a dual meaning. Not only are we quiet people I'm not meaning wallflowers, right? Because I don't feel like I'm a wallflower as in terms of introversion, but I really need to prioritize my energy. But also it's about tapping into your quiet, like your inner quiet, that inner whisper, and really
Mhm.
listening to yourself around what actually is going to support you in growing your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, leaning into what sets you apart is really, I feel like, the key unlock for a lot of people. Like, so many times we're really influenced by what other people are doing, what we see displaying as signals of success online. But in reality, behind the scenes, like you said, it's a completely different story. So, actually, I would love to kind of maybe start there. A lot of women, very capable, very experienced, successful women, feel like they're doing everything, quote unquote, right
Mm,
online, right? And maybe you can even kind of paint a picture for us of what quote unquote right looks like for a lot of,
mhm.
or what people assume it should look like, but yet they're still not seeing consistent leads in their business. And I'm curious what you feel is the disconnect. Like, what is that primary challenge that is not translating over from all of these visibility efforts into actual leads and inquiries and, bottom and top line growth?
Yeah, I love this, Ellen. And I think, well, I think this is going to sound a little bit cheeky, right? Because I think that they're doing everything right, but I think they're doing everything that they think they should be doing right.
Yeah.
Right. And so here's the thing. I call myself a seasoned chicken. I might be dating myself here. But I go back to the days before social media was even around,
Yeah.
and there were a million and one different tactics that worked back then.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we are bombarded with this message where we have to be on social media to get visible. And the truth of the matter is that it doesn't suit everybody. I speak to so many people and they're like, but Casey, I'm posting every day. I'm finding the hooks that are the right hooks.
Mhm.
And, I'm getting a couple of likes, a couple of comments, and they're not turning into clients, for
Mhm.
example. And I think that's just one thing, is that when I speak to people, they think that that's the one and only channel that we need to
Yeah.
be on to really get visible in these days. So I
Right.
think that's one of the key things, is just thinking outside the box and thinking there are other channels that you can use that are
Mhm.
potentially more aligned to who you are at your core, right? So I think that's one of the things. And I think the second thing is, and we'll probably dive into this a little bit later because, I'm all about human connection, but I just think with the bombardment of AI, like, it is just so hard to actually be seen online these days.
Yeah.
The proliferation of content, the volume of content that's being required of you to produce. And, for those of you who've got small teams or operating solo, that is a lot. We didn't go into business to become content creators. We went into business to do the work that we love. And so what I
Yeah.
feel is happening is they feel like they're doing all the things, they've done all the courses, they're listening to everything, but at the core, it feels like a chore.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the big thing, right? So we might get into some of my results, but when I think about some of these things that I've done in hindsight, Ellen, thinking hindsight's 2020, borrowing other people's audiences, I went from 100 to 4,000 people just in a few days through an event that I hosted, and we can get into that a little bit later. But I just think there's so much opportunity where you think about, okay, you're producing all this content day in and day out, and you might get one or two leads, but borrowing other people's audiences can really fast track that if you do it correctly.
Let's talk about that then, because, and I would love to hear that example that you just brought up, Casey, around,
Hmm.
this massive visibility moment that didn't require months and months of content creation to create, right?
Hmm.
So, this concept of borrowing other people's audiences, when you decided to switch over to something like this, how are you identifying A, the right people whose audiences were the people that you wanted to get in front of, but B, and this is, I think, the much harder piece and the piece that people really struggle with, is how do you position your ask in a way that it is beneficial to the person whose audience you want to get in front of, right? They're the gatekeeper, right? And they have to give you kind of that access, but you also don't want to feel like it's a one-sided collaboration. And so I think that's the piece that a lot of people struggle with, is identifying the who and then how to approach the partnership in a way that truly feels like a win-win. It makes it easy for the other person to say yes to giving you access to their audience.
Yeah, great questions. Ellen, so who first? It sounds simple, but obviously we want to go for people who have an aligned yet non-competitive audience, right? So that's obvious. And I think that's the first piece. But I think there's a couple of layers underneath this in terms of who. And I always think about there's three pieces of alignment here. So the first is your strategic alignment. So really thinking about, okay, what is the match here for you? Like, what's your strategic objective? But at the same time, what's your partner's strategic objective, right? Is it visibility? Is it lead generation? Is it like conversion? What are they looking for? So I think really getting clear on what that match is for both your partner and yourself strategically. The second piece is then audience alignment. And this is an interesting story where I partnered with someone and I was just kind of starting to test it out when I was first starting. And I was thrilled because I'd landed a partnership that I thought on paper was fantastic. And they had a very sizable audience. And I think we were probably 15, 20,000 people on their email list. And I did the partnership and I had, I think, 25 sales calls booked off the back of that, which was amazing.
Yeah,
And
wow.
none of them converted. And I was like, oh, wow, what's going on here? And I realized, oh, hold on a second. I'm selling high ticket and this audience is actually selling low ticket memberships. It's like, oh, penny drop moment here. The audience alignment is absolutely key. So when you're really thinking about who do you want to align with, it's doing your research and figuring out, okay, is there audience alignment? Because on the flip side, I did a partnership with someone who had less than 1,000 people on their email list, and that was multi-five-figure partnership deal that landed off the back of that, so that's the second piece. And then the last piece is values alignment, right? I think this is another key piece where, you might be at a networking event and people think, oh, this is perfect. I can see that this is a perfect person to swap with. But if there's not a values alignment piece, then I think there's a lack of emotional resonance. And I don't know, as highly sensitive people, we actually feel that too. So people will feel that emotional resonance, Ellen. So those are the three pieces that I what the markers for me identifying who to partner with. And then how, there's a couple of things. First of all, thinking about, okay, what's the customer journey? Upstream versus downstream, and thinking about, okay, what are the steps that we need to take in terms of the customer journey and who is actually supporting my right fit client? I call them chicken soup for the soul clients. Who's supporting my chicken soup for the soul client before they need my support, and then who needs them after I've supported them? So that's one stream. And then the second stream is identifying the knowledge gap. I always think that's the golden opportunity when you can really identify, okay, what is it that they are supporting their audience with? And then how can I plug in and actually provide even more value for that community as well?
I love the upstream and downstream example you just gave because I feel like a lot of times we think about that only within the confines of our own business, right? We think about what is our downsell, what is our upsell, but we don't think about, like you said, who is the person or the company that needs to support them before they're even ready to work with me, and then who is the right solution or person or partner to pass them off to next. That is really interesting. I feel like that's a huge takeaway for a lot of people to be able to think about that, because I bet you the majority of people listening in don't have an immediate answer for their downstream and upstream outside of their own business ecosystem. And so that's your homework assignment. Number one, if you're listening in, write that down and actually tell Casey, like DM Casey and let her know what you came to the conclusion of from that exercise. But I think what would be helpful too, Casey, is like trying to understand, because what I'm hearing you say is, okay, you find these aligned partners that, have these complementary audiences, but their services or their offers do not compete with yours. And then you have all these additional layers that you just explained.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the vetting. But when they actually say, yes, we're values aligned, we're audiences aligned, we do want to partner with you, what have you found to be the most effective ways to partner? And what I mean by that is it just your traditional kind of knowledge swap of, okay, you come do a training in my community, I'll do a training for yours? Is it a content swap, like let's promote each other's lead magnets to each other's email lists? Or is it something actually kind of more outside the box that maybe we're not considering? What have been your favorite ways to partner that you feel like have been effective on the back end too in terms of conversion?
This is such a great question because I'm a 3-5 manifesting generator, Ellen. So I'm all about experimentation.
Oh, that's so funny. funny. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. We're literally the same. I'm also Manny Gen 3.5. That's
Three,
so
five.
cool.
Oh wow, that's amazing. So you feel my pain around
Yes.
experimenting, right? And
Yes,
so
yes,
I
yes.
feel like this has been a real journey for me too. And so let me backtrack a little bit here because I think one thing is really important around this is just thinking about, okay, what are you looking to achieve here? So it's coming back to the strategy piece. So when I talk about, okay, what's been most effective, it really depends what season of business that you're in, right? And so I like to split it into four pieces, right? So one is I use partnerships in four different ways. Brand awareness, right? So what are you doing to actually get out there and build your brand? What does that look like? And how can you use partnerships to do that? The second way is lead generation. What are you looking at from a lead generation perspective to generate leads? The third piece is the cultivation piece, right? So if you're getting those leads in, what does that look like and how can you use partnerships to actually nurture your current audience? And then the fourth is the conversion piece, right? And so are there opportunities for you to partner right at the bottom of the funnel to actually convert? And you might look at something like bringing in, for example, I brought in a guest expert to come and teach my audience money mindset because I don't necessarily focus on the money mindset piece particularly, but I know that people need that in terms of the work that I do. And so I brought in a resident expert. So that was a kind of partnership. But my specialization really is on the lead generation and the conversion piece, Ellen. So coming back to what's worked and what I've seen work, I think there's a couple of pieces. One, I landed on virtual summits purely by accident, right? And so I was hosting my own podcast at the time, and I was like, oh, I really love chatting to people. And so I hosted my very first summit. We can get into this story a little bit later maybe, but I think that was the first thing where I was like, oh my gosh, I went from 100 people to 4,000 people over the course of the week that I was promoting and hosting that first summit. Obviously, summits are less popular these days and it's harder to actually get that volume of leads. But, you know, I've really looked at how can we actually bring some innovation to that? What does that look like? And so hosting micro summits, for example, so a one-day event where you might get 5 or 6 people and think about, okay, what's the experience that you want to create for that audience? And you can take them on the journey in that day and then bring in partners that actually plug in so that they have that complete experience for the day. So that's one example that's worked really well for me, is looking at hosting your own event and bringing partners in, whether it's a big production of 30 speakers or if it's just a micro event. And the other one is roundtables. So I think this is really valuable, particularly on the nurturing side, and that's what's seen conversions for me as well, is bringing in experts and hosting some kind of roundtable where I want to have the conversation, but I don't necessarily specialize in that piece. But it's an obvious segue into my offers, for example. And then the last one is lead magnet swaps. Honestly, Ellen, that's been a really, really lucrative partnership for me. Again, really making sure that the assets, whatever you're swapping, are aligned with your target audience and with the partner's target audience. And then making sure I have a very simple 2-step funnel from a lead magnet swap that converts really, really well. So literally, I will do a lead magnet swap, but on the confirmation page, I offer something really valuable that's usually paid, but I offer it for free for 7 days. So for example, if someone opts into my lead magnet, they'll land on the confirmation page and I offer a marketing audit. So I will actually hop on, normally I charge for that, but if they hop on, I'll do a marketing audit for free for them. And it's amazing what happens because there's been that trust transfer. You know, this is what happens with a partnership, is there's this trust transfer that happens. I have an application form when they're booking that call to say, how did you hear about Casey and the Quiet Collective? And so many responses I get, oh, so-and-so, I'm a super fan of hers. So if she says that you're someone to listen to, then I'm listening. And so when I get on that call, straight after the partnership swap, that trust is immediately there. I haven't had to nurture that person for days and weeks and months because of that, you know?
I think, yes, 100%. That is definitely by far the biggest strength of this type of borrowed audiences, relational marketing is exactly what you said, that trust transfer and how you can. I think actually it's interesting. I know you were talking about events in the virtual sense with like virtual summits, but I think it's kind of the same effect as, like when you go to an event, the ability to hyper nurture a relationship within 2 hours or a day is akin to that trust transfer that you get when someone who, like you said, is already a trusted figure in someone's life, when they introduce you to someone, it's that same effect. And so I completely see how that's been so effective for you. And I really love what you said about offering a normally paid product for free on that confirmation page. It did strike me though. I was like, okay, so something like a marketing audit is very generous, right? And I can see why it converts so well for you once they get the chance to hop on a call. But do you ever run into issues where it's difficult because one-on-one audits is not very scalable, right? So like, do you ever have to like limit the number of people who are able to take you up on that offer when doing a lead magnet swap, for example? Or how do you combat and be intentional about that?
Yes, again, really, really good question, because I can't tell you how many audits I've done for free, Ellen, as I'm scaling this, right? And so I think now that I've got so much more clarity about who my right fit client is, we now have a process where they actually have to apply for the marketing audit. So there's an application form. So if they
Smart.
disqualify on that
Mm,
page, then they get redirected to my lower ticket offers so that they're not.
okay.
But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing now. So still
Okay.
adding value, but
Yeah.
there is a disqualification process now, so that I'm not having to do all of them.
Right. No, that completely makes sense. And I appreciate that you've given us so many specific examples of, different ways that you have done these partnerships that have worked out well for you. Another kind of like a specific example I wanted to get your insight on was actually when you first kind of like had to restart your business, you were able to scale to $166,000 in 5 months. Again, without a single social media post. And so I'm curious, what was the game plan or the play that you did to get to that first six figures without social media? Is it the same things that you've already talked about, or was there anything else that you experimented with that worked well in that season?
And that season, Ellen, it was definitely the virtual summits, right? And so back then, Amy Porterfield was my very first keynote on that first summit, which is, I think, one of the reasons that I scaled so quickly in terms of like getting so many people into that summit. But that
Yeah.
was really the first seed that I noticed, was like, oh, wow, I can see how quickly I can generate leads.
Mm,
Caveat here, and I haven't shared this too too publicly, but on the back end of that summit, I didn't really monetize it, Ellen. Like
yeah.
I was like, I had all these people, but I was like, well, what do I do with them now? And
Mm,
so that was very intentional. When I went on to host summit number 2, summit number 3, summit number 4, I was like, oh wow, now I can see, okay, what do people need? Again, creating that entire experience and then making sure my offer on the back end really supported
mm,
that. So that's what happened in my second summit, was just the lessons learned from the
yeah.
first summit, where the mistakes that I made, and then how can I kind of plug the holes to really ensure that I actually monetize off the back of that now.
Thank you for being honest with us and sharing that. I am sure you are not the only person who has experienced kind of that influx of leads, but then like, wait a minute, I don't think that
What do I
actually
do with it?
yeah, resulted in what I thought it would. So I think that's great that you've been able to, build on those lessons. I want to zoom out for a second as we're kind of wrapping this conversation, because I know that, some of these things like virtual summits or like the panels that you might host or even the micro summits, right? The list swaps, maybe not the list swaps as much, but like the other more kind of like event-based type activations or partnerships, those are pretty time intensive to plan, right? And they require a lot of energy to produce. And so if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, Casey, like you've convinced me, I believe that I could grow my business without social media, but maybe I only have the capacity to do one of these like big type of partnership activations once a year. For the rest of the year, what should I be doing, right? To get myself out there and to continue to bring in a steady flow of new leads. How often are you doing these kind of bigger event type partnerships versus what are the other maybe month to month, week to week activities that people can be thinking about implementing into their marketing plan that supplement, these bigger waves of interest?
Yeah, great. Ellen, great question. So here's the thing. Absolutely. Putting on a virtual summit is a huge production, right? It is a ton of work. And obviously, because I've done so many now, I have a system and a process that I can plug and play. So I think that's one thing. It's really just looking at, okay, how can you create this partnership engine where you can actually plug and play things? So doing it once, documenting everything, and then making sure that you can, the next year do exactly the same thing. And it's not having to reinvent the wheel every single year. So in terms of my cadence, what that looks like is it's one big production once a year, typically one big virtual summit. I try to do some kind of other smaller event, whether it's a micro summit, whether it's a round table once a quarter. And then what I'm then putting in place in terms of the partnership flywheel are my lead magnet swaps. So can I actually look at just doing an email swap with a partner once every couple of weeks, once a month? Or can I go and actually present my workshop into someone else's audience once a month or once every couple of months? So I'm really looking at my promotional calendar and saying, okay, what can I do at least once a month, preferably every 2 weeks, just keep the leads flowing in. And typically those are the things that I do, is lead magnet swaps and then presenting into other people's audiences.
Thank you so much for breaking that down for us, Casey. My brain kind of works that way. Like, okay, let's start with the macro, like once a year activities, once a quarter, once a month,
Right.
or once a week, right? So that was really, really helpful. I think someone could definitely build a very sustainable marketing plan off of what you just shared here. Is there anything else that you want to impart on our listeners around this idea of going social media optional or relationship driven marketing as we wrap up today? Any last thoughts on like why people should really consider this now more than ever?
So, yes, I think a couple of things to really consider as to why this is such a great opportunity now, Ellen, is 5 years ago, I think it was a nice to have. I think it was someone who maybe was introverted or quiet or highly sensitive and they just didn't want to be on social media. And
Mhm.
so this was a great alternative, right? I think in today's age and what's going on with the introduction of AI, I pulled a stat up actually.
Oh,
88% of users said they now distrust news on social media because of AI generated content.
mm,
So if you think about it, someone's hopping onto Instagram, scrolling, and they're like, well, can I trust this or can't I trust this? Right. And so
mhm.
it comes back to this whole concept of trust. And the reason that I think partnership marketing is such an opportunity right now is that it does. It accelerates that trust so quickly. It's what we call, it was actually back in the day, back in the 1900s, I think a guy by the name of Thorndike coined this phrase, the halo effect, right? And
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
exactly what happens, right? So someone introduces you to their audience and immediately that trust is transferred. So I think there's such an opportunity now because of the fact that we are living in a world where it's very AI dominated. And at the end of the day, we're all humans. We want to connect. And
Yeah.
so, when we can actually connect human to human, conversation to conversation, and at the core of business, it's all about relationships. I think connection leads, cash and clients follow. So when you can really focus on that relationship building and really look at, okay, these are long-term investments and look at building those threads of connection that can turn into sturdy rope, that relationship's going to last the distance, right? It's not going to
Yeah.
be dependent on the algorithms or what's happening and what's trending at the time.
That's so, so true. And I just feel like this almost this reversal to is this wider trend in society, especially among the younger generation, which is really interesting to observe this return to analog things and people wanting and craving those types of experiences because either they missed it completely in their childhood or they crave that simpler time. And we know how powerful nostalgia is too as a marketing kind of tool or whatnot. And so I just love everything you're saying about how relationships and longevity go hand in hand with a successful, sustainable business. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, Casey, and giving us really great examples of how you've done this so well in your own business. I know for a fact there must be many people listening who are like, let me give this a try. Would love to get off of social media and that hamster wheel. So where can people go to connect with you, especially if you're not as active on social? I don't know if you just keep that for like DMs and messages or if you prefer to be contacted via email, but where can people best reach you?
Yeah, absolutely, Ellen. Like you said, I'm not very active on socials. I talk about being a side dish, not the main plate, right? So I'm like,
Yeah,
I
so do
might
I.
pop in here and there. And so, yes, please feel free to DM me either on Instagram Instagram at caseylightbody.biz or Facebook Casey Lightbody, or alternatively, yes, let's go old school and email me at casey@quietcollective.com.au.
Amazing. All of those links, by the way, will be below in the show notes. So please, again, especially if you do that homework assignment that we we assign to you, message Casey or email Casey and let her know what your social media optional plan is. And if they're interested in having you audit their marketing channels or anything like that, Casey, can they just reach out and ask for that, or is there a direct link that people could go to book that with you?
Oh, absolutely. So definitely I have my social media free marketing guide. So in
Okay.
that guide, I share 13 different ways that I've tried and tested that actually work in terms of generating leads and converting leads. So feel free to download that. And then obviously you'll land on the page to book a marketing audit. And I'm more than happy to kind of go through that and really look at where we can plug partnerships into your marketing plan.
Amazing. Perfect. So definitely go download that guide. And then, yes, if you need more one-on-one support and guidance, please, again, book a time with Casey. Thank you so much again for joining us, Casey. And thank you all for tuning in. We will catch you in the next episode.